there's always a rush to overcorrect. But I think CEOs planning to completely scrap physical space are going to be making a serious mistake.
Welcome to the future of retail. I am joined today by Zach Aarons of MetaProp. Zach, thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Zach is co-founder and general partner at MetaProp, which is widely known as basically the player in prop tech investing. Currently on the Technology Council for the Urban Land Institute, professor of prop tech at Columbia University, and 2017 recipient of New York City Real Estate Tech Week's Investor of the Year Award. Congrats for that, Zach.
Thank you.
So Zach, the world is in a crazy place today, especially with regards to real estate. What has been the most surprising thing to you in the COVID crisis?
The most surprising thing as it relates to real estate is just how swiftly things happened and the deterioration of certain asset classes and the debt and equity associated with them. I knew going into this that hotels would be impaired significantly, but I didn't expect to see the pace, the precipitous decline that we saw over the last few months. I've been surprised, I would say, by the resiliency of the multifamily asset class. I thought that way fewer people, given how many people are now unfortunately out of work. I was surprised by how many people paid their rent in April and May for their apartment. So that was sort of a surprise to the upside as it relates to real estate. But every day is different. We take every day as it comes. There are surprises happening every day, and we're all trying to navigate them.
Yeah, I remember as this was all unfolding in mid-March, at least here in the US, that's really when the impact started to propagate. One thing that I think took everybody by surprise was how quickly the landscape was changing. It felt like checking the news multiple times a day, I was still falling behind. And I think it's really interesting that you bring that up, because in the world of commercial real estate, it's traditionally a slow moving industry. You're thinking about projects with multi-year, sometimes multi-decade time horizons. So there's an extreme juxtaposition right now in the frame of thinking that you need to be in, right? How have you seen the most successful people in commercial real estate handle that and be able to juggle extremely long time horizons with the swiftness of how things are changing day to day? And do you have any advice for people that maybe aren't handling that juxtaposition so well?
I think there's always a rush to overcorrect. So in the real estate world, that might mean, well, I have an office building that I'm in planning stages of, maybe permitting stages. I still could make changes. I think a mistake would be to rush and completely scrap the plans for the office building, for example, and say, I'm going to build a apartment building instead, because apartments seem to be more resilient in the COVID crisis. And work from home has shown that we may need less office space per capita going forward. I think a prudent approach would be, instead of completely scrapping my plans, let me adjust my plans. Can I build an office building more efficiently? Can I take this as an opportunity to build the most hygienic office building in the world that's guaranteed the best air quality in the world, instead of building a generic office building, and then I might be at an advantage when the building's finally built relative to my competition. But to your point, it's very challenging to move swiftly within real estate.
Do you think, industry professionals right now are at risk of overcorrecting because things are going to mostly go back to normal? Is there a little bit of an undertone there on your side that you're thinking that this is a ripple rather than a complete change course in the overall macro trend line?
It's certainly more than a ripple, but what always has historically happened in crises, and granted, this one could be different, and I don't have a crystal ball, but traditionally what's happened is that you've seen an immediate overcorrection followed by a mean reversion. But even with that mean reversion, things are still altered forever. So, for example, I don't think the need for office space is completely going away at all anytime soon. However, the success that a lot of companies have had at implementing 100% work from home over the last 2 months has given CEOs of corporations a lot of thought about massively reducing their physical space. So that trend is going to continue. Um, but I think CEOs planning to completely scrap physical space are going to be making a serious mistake. And that would be what I would call an overcorrection.
Do you have a take on retail specifically and whether that holds true for retail?
I think with retail, there are always going to be specific goods where people are much more comfortable buying them in person. I think the what was trends that were happening already in retail were toward increasing market share of e-commerce, increasing desire for brands to become omnichannel and not necessarily using their physical spaces for selling goods, but using their physical spaces to connect their brand to their customers in different ways and to provide experiences for their customers. I think one of the challenges that we're going to see in retail is a lot of the experiences that stores were beginning to offer their customers, whether it was drinking at a bar or virtual fittings in a fitting room, are going to be fundamentally seen by many as unhygienic. I'll give you an example. There's been a trend toward um, these new pop-up experience spaces, whether it's the Museum of Ice Cream or the
Exactly.
Color
Yeah.
Factory. I took my kids to the Color Factory pre-COVID, and we splashed around in a ball pit together with
When was the
about.
last time that ball pit had been cleaned?
That's my point. I don't know if people are going to be willing to splash around in a ball pit anymore with a bunch of strangers. However, people are still going to want that Instagrammable experience when they go into a store. So I don't have a solution for what that looks like. And it's a little bit outside of my area of expertise. So I'm not comfortable even opining on it. But I do know that it's going to change.
Yeah, and actually, I love that you brought that up because I did want to ask your take on that. There's the common saying "adapt or die," and I feel like when it comes to technology, maybe "adopt or die" is the way to reformulate that saying. My question for someone who spends their day in day out thinking about the next technology trends to hit commercial real estate, is this an adopt or die moment, or is it maybe too late if you haven't been adopting all along and this is when you got to face the music?
Um, it's never too late to adopt software to make your business more efficient. One of the things we're seeing, which is a small silver lining, is that people who have been resistant to technological change over the past decade, they've stayed with the abacus in the back room and the pen, the paper, the fax machine. They've been forced to innovate or die. Essentially, they've been forced to adopt tools like Zoom in their personal lives, and so it's made it a lot uh, easier for them to adopt technology tools in their work as well. And so we've seen certain technologies, the adoption of those in a pretty recalcitrant industry, traditionally, we've seen that accelerate quite a bit.
Is any of the technology that we've been building for the last 5, 10 years suddenly obsolete because things have just changed and we're in a new era where maybe you were thinking about adopting technology, but you need to take a step back and reassess whether that's even valuable in the new world that we're about to enter?
I don't think there are any technologies that have become obsolete necessarily in prop tech. I think there are certain technologies that are unfortunately built to service industries that are so impaired, or asset classes that are so heavily impaired, where adoption isn't happening because um, the customers just have so many other things that they're worrying about, so many other fires they have to put out, and they may not feel like they have the money to spend on new technology right now. But that doesn't necessarily mean the technology itself is going to be obsolete.
So it's more of a hibernation than a death.
I think so. I think so. Yeah. What we tell our companies in those spaces is get enough cash to essentially mothball your business and hibernate for as long as possible until your industry comes back online. And then when your industry comes back online, you'll actually be very well positioned because those customers will have seen the adoption of similar technologies in other asset classes during this crisis, and they'll want to emulate that.
Makes sense. I wanted to get your take on, is this an acceleration event or is this a disruption event, right? Where I'm calling an acceleration event one that is taking the trends that we've been seeing over the last few years and what we were expecting to develop over the next several years and just squishing the time frame in which all of that progress and change is happening? Or are we making a U-turn here and completely changing course on trends? It sounds like you're thinking of this more as an acceleration event. Is that right?
It's both. It's
Okay.
accelerating
So what's being
trends.
disrupted?
The trend that will be accelerated is the utilization of physical brick and mortar retail as experiential retail. The disruption is around what that experience will actually be, because my opinion of many of those experiences were that they, in hindsight, were fundamentally unhygienic. So the disruption is related to the nature of the experience. The acceleration is related to the need for experience versus retail as purely transactional.
Okay. So let me hit you with a few more trends, and these are all going to be retail focused, just as a heads up.
That's okay.
And I want to get your take on what you see, in the next couple years as being the trend, whether it's being accelerated, reversed, completely disrupted. We already touched on experiential retail, Museum of Ice Cream. Do you put Top Golf in that category?
That's the golf simulator.
Yep.
Yes, I suppose I do.
Okay. And then you touched on e-commerce, clicks to bricks, omni-channel. That you're thinking is also going to be accelerated.
Yeah, I think you're seeing the success with Shopify launching its first direct-to-consumer platform, and that platform is proving to be the first potential large-scale threat to Amazon's sort of hegemony. So I think you're going to see smaller retailers increasing their online presence because of the simple tools available for them to do so. Um, I think what you're gonna what people are struggling to figure out is what once you cross the threshold into the store, what type of experience are you providing? Um, are you serving them drinks still? If so, are they uh, in paper cups because people are scared to share glasses? What does a dressing room look like? I just read an article about the Gap that they're opening quite a few of their stores next week. They're opening them back up, but all of the stores the dressing rooms will be completely closed. Um, Part of the desire to still purchase something in a store is because you get to try it on. If you can't try something on, what's the experience in the store? And I don't have a great answer for that. Um, so I think it's that those are that's the heart of that's the crux of the issue right now.
All right, how about this one? The death of the shopping mall.
So shopping malls, certainly the class B, C, and D shopping malls were already dying, and a lot of the more progressive landlords were doing interesting things to try to lure tenants back to the malls. So we saw landlords experimenting with co-working spaces in malls. We saw landlords experimenting with increased food and beverage in malls. We saw landlords experimenting with um, gyms in malls. I think that is going to be challenging going forward. I think you're going to see malls are going to have to be completely repurposed into what I don't exactly know. It's very expensive to knock a mall down and build something up in its place. Um, so uh, shopping malls will still have to exist. They represent too large an amount of square footage, especially within the United States, for them to all completely close or all be completely physically destroyed. What they do become, though, I truly don't know. I thought they were going to become these sort of mini community centers where you'd go to work there, you'd go to the gym there, um, and that might that might still be the reality for many malls. But a lot of malls will not survive this pandemic for sure.
All right, last one. The trend towards urbanization and us becoming a more urban society.
Still happening. This pandemic is slowing it down. I think you will see, especially for people who have grown up children or do not have children yet, you're going to see a lot more fluidity and flexibility with how they decide to spend their lives. I think one of the major pulls for people into urban centers is number one is jobs, and if there aren't jobs, they're not going to be there. And number two is culture. And if you have everybody scared to go to the theater or go to a concert, or they just want to do it virtually in their,
Online concerts?
did you see Travis Scott's
Yeah,
Fortnite concert
exactly.
had 12 million people? So if the cultural institutions are truly going to shut down their brick and mortar presences, I think there won't, and the jobs are few and far between. I think cities will be challenged in the short term, and I think population growth into cities will slow in the short term. But I think overall, the urbanization trends are going to continue.
Got it. We've covered a lot at this point, but I just have to ask as a closing question here. Again, as somebody who thinks about the future of commercial real estate day in, day out, trends, technologies, what's next on the market. What is your, I guess, are there any major changes to your worldview or your framework of thinking around what the future holds given the COVID crisis? Or like, are there any topics that we haven't touched on yet that you want to call out?
There are a couple categories that we thought were interesting pre-COVID, but not necessarily economically viable, that have now become economically viable, and we're interested in in potentially deploying capital. So one of those just easy examples would be robotic cleaning. Um, and we looked at it, and there are a lot of interesting companies in the space, but it didn't really make economic sense for the adoption to accelerate. But that's an example where now we've kind of changed our tune on it in the short term, but long term we always had a thesis that a lot of this stuff is going to become roboticized. I think you're seeing, there's stuff where we were probably hesitant to make an investment, where now we're thinking more about wanting to make an investment in the near term. But uh, none of our long term theses have changed. None, not a single one. They're all the same as what they were in 2015 when we founded the firm.
Got it. Great. All right, Zach, pleasure. Thank you for joining me today. To learn more about Zach Aarons and MetaProp, go to metaprop.vc. Thank you for joining me. Future of Retail.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.